Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're dialing in from. We're excited to have you join us today on our Ensuring Accountability web seminar with New York Times bestselling author Ron McMillan. My name is Paul, and I'll be your event coordinator today. By way of housekeeping, I just wanted to make mention of a few things. If you're on Twitter and happen to and would like to discuss, we're using it's my privilege today to introduce Ron McMillan. Ron McMillan's one of our New York Times bestselling authors here at Vital Smarts. Ron is co-author of Crucial Conversations, Crucial Confrontations, upon which some of our content today will be based, as well as Influencer. And Ron is now a four-time New York Times bestselling author. As our newest book, Change Anything, just made #3 on the New York Times bestselling list. So we're excited to have Ron with us. Ron has worked with countless organizations to help them solve their most pressing accountability problems and help them to kind of change the behaviors that allow organizations to be successful with holding others accountable. So we're excited to have him share some tips with us today. We'll see how far we get. We should hopefully have some time for some questions and answers at the end of today's session. We'll let you know when that would be available, and you're able to submit those through your GoToWebinar console. So with that, I will turn it over to Ron McMillan.
With you some principles of accountability and some specific skills based on our New York Times bestselling book, Crucial Confrontations. And so the principles of accountability help you think about accountability and guide you in holding others accountable. And then the interpersonal skills found in Crucial Confrontations help you have that accountability conversation. And so we'll be working on both. Let me ask you some rhetorical questions. If you're sitting here next to me, I'd make you answer these. But I want you to think through very carefully, why is holding others accountable so hard? Why is that so difficult? Whether it's a teenage daughter who promised to clean her room and didn't, or it's a boss who made some commitments to the team and then failed to deliver on those commitments. Why is that so hard to hold others accountable? What are the costs of not holding others accountable? If someone's underperforming, they know the standard, they know the output, they know what they should be doing, and they're not delivering. What if we just let that slide? Say, well, I'm sure they'll improve. I'll just let this go. What are the costs to the job they're performing, to your team, to your goals and outputs? What are the costs to others who see someone freeloading and not being held accountable? And what are the costs of actually trying to hold people accountable, having those conversations with them, confronting noncompliance, and doing it poorly, doing it in a way that damages relationships and undermines motivation and resolve? What would be the cost of that? Well, it's very, very costly to individuals and their performance. And yet, we find as we go in organizations across North America, and I suspect this is true in other places as well, that there are tremendous costs when we avoid the holding others accountable and having those confrontations with them. And we also find that that's the number one way most supervisors and managers deal with performance problems, is they avoid them. And if they don't avoid them, they minimize them or sugarcoat them, so that they soften the blow is how they think about it, but the result ends up being little to no accountability. And boy, when standards slide, there's a huge cost. In fact, what if avoiding accountability conversations is not an occasional occurrence between one manager and a direct report, but what if it's a widespread practice? What if, in fact, that's how most managers in your organization handle accountability issues? What if that's how most nurses handle accountability problems with the boss, with the doctors or physicians? What if it's a widespread practice? What if you have a culture of not holding others accountable? How would that affect the results of the organization? How would that affect the leader, a given leader's results? Whether it's quality, cost cutting, keeping to a budget, improving performance, productivity. Virtually every result that leaders care about are dramatically impacted by whether or not we hold people accountable. Now, I'm guessing that this is obvious to all of you, and I probably don't need to belabor it, but I start here because, in fact, it's a gigantic problem, and yet we often don't think about it. We often think we're being nice by letting others slide in their accountability, not realizing the costs involved in doing that. Now, I did a study with an organization, and I'll not identify the organization, but I'll tell you it's a well-known Fortune 500 company, and they're very successful. They're very successful in terms of stock, in terms of profit, in terms of how they treat their people. It's considered by many one of the best companies to work for. And this was a survey we did, and I just took their survey. It could have been one of many, but I picked them because they're such an excellent company doing such a marvelous job. And in this survey, we asked this question and then made a statement, and then we asked if people agree or disagree. Here's the first one. In my company, peers hold one another accountable immediately and directly without waiting for bosses to get involved or otherwise escalating their problems. In my company, peers hold one another accountable. You look at that number, 33% agree with that statement. Add the 7 on there, and 40% of the people say they do hold each other accountable and not escalate problems. That's pretty amazing. That's really, really good. However, look at the number of people who cannot agree with that statement. 59% of people filling out the survey cannot answer, I agree, to the statement that in my company, peers hold one another accountable. What are the implications if peers cannot hold each other accountable? In fact, 59% see this is something they can't do. What are the implications for cross-teaming? What are the implications for internal customers and suppliers? What are the implications for our processes if, in fact, we cannot hold peers accountable without having to escalate the problem? How about this next one? Same company. In my company, it is possible to hold people accountable for their commitments regardless of their level or position. My heavens, that's a large number that agree. That is wonderful. And by the way, this is better than most companies that we go into. But again, I want to draw your attention to those who cannot answer or agree to that question. That's 33%. 1/3 of people in this organization say it's not possible to hold people accountable for their commitments regardless of level, that we have to take level into account, and this assumes that some levels you just don't, or you can't, or if it's too wide a gap between your level and theirs. What are the implications for organizational performance where 1/3 feel that they've got to be level conscious in holding people accountable? Let me do one more. Some of our critical projects and programs suffer because leaders aren't held accountable for offering leadership and support in the way we need them to. Look at that number. 55% cannot answer agree to that statement. 55% are saying, in other words, that leaders are not held accountable for offering leadership and support. That's mind-boggling. And remember, this is a really good company. What are the implications for performance? Well, let me share with you 3 principles of accountability. And if you're going to create an accountability, you've got to have clear expectations. To try and hold someone accountable and they're not sure who does what by when, they're not sure what's expected of them, how it will be measured, when the deadlines are, that's not accountability at all. What you're doing then is nagging and grinding on people rather than setting up a clear accountability. Reminds me of the story of a young mother who had a 4-year-old daughter, and she took her out in their yard, which was in a quiet cul-de-sac, and said, "Here, you can play with your friend while I plant flowers." And the daughter says, "Okay." And so the mother would be right there to watch. And then she said to her daughter and the friend, "Now you can play on the grass and on the sidewalk, you can have fun, but don't cross the curb." She says, "Promise me, don't cross the curb. A car could hurt you if you cross the curb." And they said, okay, Mommy. And she says, "Promise me." "Okay, I promise." "Great, have fun." And so the mother's watching them and planting flowers, and she kind of gets involved with the flowers, and then she hears a car driving quickly slow and then stop. The driver beeps to get the mom's attention, and the mom turns and looks, and here's her 4-year-old daughter standing in the middle of the road. When the car beeped, the daughter saw the car and started crying and kind of panicked and froze. She wasn't in danger because the driver saw her and the car stopped, but Mom's heart just skipped a beat. She ran out there and she picked up her daughter and she said, "You said you wouldn't cross the curb. I told you not to cross the curb." She goes, "You're in so much trouble." And the daughter just cried and cried and cried. And the mother waved at the driver and then walked into her yard and just kind of held the daughter for a minute as she settled herself. And then when she kind of caught her breath as her mom was holding her, she said, "Mommy, what's a curb?" This is an example for me where we're expecting things of others that we haven't clearly communicated and articulated. So the first principle of accountability is clear expectations. Decide who does what by when, and make sure measurement's clear, performance is clear, timing and deadlines are clear. That's where accountability begins, with clear expectations. Now, another principle of accountability has to do with frequency, and that is, how frequently do you follow up with someone? People who follow up too frequently are considered micromanagers, and they just as well do the job. Why is this person here? Often that creates bad feelings when a person feels you're hovering and smothering them, and yet just as big a problem could be too infrequent accountability, where in fact people who need help look around and there's no one to provide help or support or to answer important questions. So think of it as a continuum, a frequency continuum ranging from more to less. And then I'd like to propose that there are 3 things to take into account when you're deciding how frequent the accountability should be. The first, of course, is experience. Someone who's very inexperienced, brand new to the job, you'd want to have more frequent accountability so that you can take complex tasks or projects, break them into their component parts, and arrange a frequency that's often enough that you can check and make sure they're doing it right. You can correct, give feedback. You can answer questions, provide support. Now, a person who's very experienced in the job, has been very successful, has a history of producing results on time, then much less the frequency would be much less. They don't need a lot of follow-up. They don't need a lot of contact. And in fact, you might schedule regular work planning and reviews and say, now, if something comes up in between, then grab me and talk to me. So one important element is how experienced are they? Now, don't use this to label people because it could be that with one given direct report who has a new project, something they haven't done before, you would have frequent accountability with them regarding that project, but much less frequency regarding their overall job. And so this isn't how mature or immature someone is and then you label them and then that determines the frequency. It's what's the task they're on, how experienced are they, how knowledgeable are they, and it might be that on 4 different projects for the same person, you have 4 different degrees of frequency in order to help them succeed. Another element is criticality. I remember working with the Department of Energy, Savannah River plant, the largest producer of plutonium in the free world, where they have these breeder reactors. And they have very experienced nuclear physicists that they know exactly what they're doing. They know how everything operates. And the frequency of accountability is each of them performs one step, then stops. And their step is checked by someone else. Then they take the next step and stop. And the next step they just took is checked by someone else. Even though they're very experienced, very knowledgeable, the criticality is so great that you want no chance of human error, and you check and recheck. They're learning more and more in critical operations to have a checklist, and that each step is checked, even by others, even though it's a very experienced physician. Now, my staff tells me that I invented the word criticality, that it isn't such a word. If that's the case, I both apologize and announce a new word, criticality. If, in fact, the task is not that critical, if it's missed, it doesn't really affect the overall team goals or the overall project, then maybe less frequency would make a lot of sense in that case. The third element that I would like to emphasize in terms of frequency is coaching. And often it's very efficient for a team leader to make the decisions, keep things moving, break complex tasks into component parts that would be manageable by people, assign them out, do a fairly frequent accountability. And that's pretty efficient. It's pretty effective. You build a well-oiled team that way. However, it might be that with a given person or a given team, part of the result you're after is the outcomes of their work, but another goal you're after is growing them, teaching them, helping them to be able to make the decisions without you, helping them to take initiative without checking back with you. That often requires a degree of coaching where you're explaining why things are done. When a decision's being faced by the direct report, they come and talk with you and you reason it through with them and show them the positives and negatives of each outcome. You might even show them how to do a cost-benefit analysis and help them to make good decisions jointly so that over time they can make it on their own. And so it might be for heavy-duty coaching in some situations that more frequency would serve you, the other person, and your development goals for them best. And so take into account how much do they have to learn, how much will your involvement be critical in them learning that. And so clear expectations are absolutely essential to accountability. Frequency is very important when you're looking at follow-up and people accounting for their work. And then a social condition I like to call safety. We learned in our research on crucial confrontations something that you all know, but let me state the obvious. If someone doesn't feel safe with me, if they don't really trust that I have their best interests in heart, if they are not confident that I'm there to help rather than hurt, they're very reluctant to disclose, very reluctant to talk about problems and share what really happened. They're even very reluctant to share ideas for improvement. If someone doesn't feel safe with me, if they're not sure what I'm going to do with the information they give me, then when it comes to feedback, and I give them feedback about how to improve, it feels to them like criticism, and it stings. And they tend to respond with silence, just withdraw and shut down and not talk it through with me, or with violence. Oh yeah, well you're not so perfect yourself. On the other hand, if someone feels really safe with me, if they know my intent is to help, not hurt, if they know I'm committed to their growth and development, if they know I'm looking to fix problems, not fix blame, then they're very willing to disclose. They're very open with me. They're very happy to share their ideas and discuss problems. Similarly, if they feel safe with me, when I give them feedback, it feels to them like coaching and caring. That in fact I care enough to give them suggestions for improvement. And they tend to be much more open instead of responding with defensiveness. So if accountability is important to your results, and I don't know a single result where that isn't the case, then the 3 principles of accountability you ought to operate on, and there are others I'm sure that are very important, but these are the 3 I'd really like to emphasize. You have to have absolutely clear expectations. Who does what by when? You have to upfront agree upon and decide the frequency, more often or more or less, and follow that. You can't set a frequency as I'll check up with you on Friday and see how things are going, and then Wednesday start hovering around and ask questions, Thursday start hovering and ask questions. No, that undermines the accountability. That says you're in charge, not them, right? But you've got to make sure that the best balance occurs, and that's by taking into account those things we talked about. The final principle of accountability that I'd really like to emphasize is safety. Make it safe. To the degree they feel safe, then in fact you can have a very robust planning sessions, very robust accountability sessions. You can get the very best ideas for improvement. You can have people be very candid with you about their problems and their weaknesses so you can help them improve. To make it safe, there are 2 conditions you create. If both of these conditions are present, people feel safe. If one or more conditions are missing, they don't feel safe. If these conditions are present to a large degree, they feel really safe. If they're only present to a small degree, they feel sort of safe. The conditions are mutual purpose and mutual respect. Mutual purpose is you and I are not in competition. It's not in my best interest to have you fail. Rather, I care about outcomes that you care about, and you care about outcomes that are relevant to our team and my goals as a leader. This would also apply to peer relationships, and it especially applies to holding leaders who have authority over me accountable. You've got to establish mutual purpose first. There's an adage in the Army that says, before you disagree with your commanding officer, salute the flag. I love that. Before you disagree with your commanding officer, salute the flag. What that means is by saluting the flag, you're showing the commanding officer that you have mutual purpose with her, that your objective is the mission's objective. Your objective is the safeguarding the freedoms of America, and that you respect your commanding officer as well as have a mutual purpose. So to really make it safe, they need to know that you care about their goals and that you're both working toward the same things. Now, when it comes to accountability, you've already come to agreement on clear expectations. Now you just have to remind each other of why we're doing this and that both of us are trying to accomplish this together. Mutual respect is a little more tricky. Mutual respect is you know I care enough about you to be respectful. When I hold you accountable, I don't yell, scream, and threaten, which is very disrespectful. I don't disparage your ancestry, which is horribly disrespectful. Rather, I treat you with respect as a coworker, a team player, and as a professional. In fact, the other person deserves the respect due every human being. And that's a minimum level of respect. Now, if I can build upon that, then we can create very strong respect and very strong conditions of safety. One day I was flying on a plane, had a 4-hour flight, pulled out my my novel. Oh, crumb. Read the last 2 pages. Pulled out the Sky magazine. Oh, I've read that issue. Pulled out the barf bag, read the instructions. Finally, turned to the guy sitting next to me, and I said, so, what do you do to make a living? He goes, me? I'm FBI. Wow! I had never talked to an FBI guy before. This promises to give me at least 3.5 hours of entertainment on my flight. I said, what do you do for the Bureau? He goes, I'm a hostage negotiator. Whoa! Hostage negotiator? Not only have I never talked to one of those, they use communication a lot, which is an area of interest I have. I said, so if some sleazeball is holding these people hostage, you're the one they call. He said, if it's in the Northwest District, I'm the guy they call. I said, okay. So picture this situation. Here you got a slime ball with a big gun holding these people hostage. What's the first thing you do? He goes, well, you secure the perimeter. You don't want this thing moving on you, and you don't want this thing escalating. You secure the perimeter. Of course that's what you do. That's what I'd expect an FBI guy to say. I say, okay, so we got the perimeter secure. Now what do you do? He said, well, we have to establish a means of communication. Can we call them on the phone? Do we run them in a walkie-talkie? Do we shout through an open window? You can't negotiate if you can't communicate. Whoa! I thought that could be the title of a book. This is great. You can't negotiate if you can't communicate. Okay. So you run them in a walkie-talkie. Now what do you do? He goes, well, I try and find a quiet place away from the others, and I create respect in my heart for the perpetrator. I said, pardon me? I said, you're kidding, right? Respect in your heart for the perpetrator? That didn't sound FBI to me. He goes, oh, no. He says, I'm very serious. He said, people are respect radars. They're constantly scanning their environment, looking for disrespect. If they sense disrespect from someone, that becomes the primary issue. Everything else is secondary. You know, from my experience with negotiations, I knew he is exactly right. I had been in one management union negotiation with $1 billion of pay and benefits on the table being negotiated, and at a critical moment, the executive vice president insulted the union president. The union president stood up, said, "I don't have to take that from you," gathered his papers and walked out, and the rest of the union committee walked out. At that moment, how he was treated, the disrespect he was shown, was more important to him than the $1 billion on the table waiting to be negotiated. So I knew his point was right, that respect is a primary value. And suddenly I was flabbergasted. I said, how do you show respect to someone who's doing such a despicable thing? How can you be respectful towards such a slimeball? He says, you know, I found that if you don't show respect, they'll know it within a few exchanges, and they'll kill a hostage. They'll say, if you don't respect me, at least you'll fear me. He said, so I know how critical it is. He said, the way I've learned to create respect, it's got to be genuine, and I've got to feel it, and they will know when I talk to them whether I respect them or not. So he said, I just clear my mind, and I say, I don't know what you want. I don't know what circumstances led you to this situation. I don't know how you were raised or where you were raised, but you are a human being, and you are due the respect due every human being. He says, when I get that thought in my head, I lock onto it, I hold it till I feel it in my heart, and then we're ready to begin the negotiations. What I realized about respect is not only is it an essential condition for communication, it's an essential condition for holding others accountable. And I learned from that FBI guy that respect isn't something you give someone when they earn it. Rather, respect is a way you choose to treat people. It's your choice. It's totally within your power. And if someone is being disrespectful to you, you get to decide whether to take offense or not. You get to decide whether to respond with respect to their disrespect. And it's amazing how quickly emotions subside and people come to true dialogue when you're consistently respectful, consistently looking for mutual purpose. Now, with those in mind, those principles, let me share with you a revolutionary finding. We found in our research on holding people accountable, confronting noncompliance, having crucial conversations, that a lot of managers and leaders rely on position power. Do it because I said so. The other person knowing that you can make their life pretty miserable as a leader in the organization if you have authority over them. But we found the more position power people used, the less likely they were to succeed over time. Most leaders need an infrastructure of effective working relationships to get things done regularly, consistently over time. And while we found if you threaten people, you see them scamper and immediately get busy, it has the appearance of accomplishment, but often other factors are being cooked that undermine your effectiveness as a leader over time. Why not use power? Power kills relationships. When you ask someone to do something, and the reason they do it is they're afraid of what you'll do to them, they're afraid of the negative consequences you can impose in their life, you've just damaged the relationship very deeply. And parents don't know this. A lot of parents don't realize that when they use power, I threaten a spanking, I get mad and angry and give ultimatums, we are undermining the relationship we're trying to build. We found power almost always creates resistance. People don't like it. They want to push back. And given that they can't do it openly, it's often covertly that they start resisting and pushing back. We found power lasts only as long as you're present. And in your absence, people won't do things that you've told them to do. Or when they feel that you no longer can hurt them with consequences. Finally, power feeds the hog. And we found in a study we did at a large wood products company in the Northwest that when people get really angry with their supervisor, when they feel the supervisor's unfair, goes violent with them, is disrespectful, then we actually watched some people on the supervisor's team in his absence get good wood that had been milled and was ready to ship to the customer, and they took it down the other side of the plant and put it in the hog. A hog's a big open-mouth machine with whirling blades. You throw in a piece of scrap wood, out comes sawdust. And they were putting good wood, ready to ship to the customer, into the hog, grinding it into sawdust. Later, I confronted one of these guys. I said, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Well, we had a team meeting. We decided the supervisor had crossed the line. He was foul and abusive, and he hit one of our employees, so we decided he had to go." And I said, "And how are you going to get him to go?" They said, "Well, a supervisor's job is productivity. At the end of each shift, they measure board feet, they weigh sawdust. If sawdust goes up, board feet goes down, supervisor's in trouble. If he can't correct it within 5 working days, supervisor's fired." All of a sudden, ding, the law of the hog was born. And we found it doesn't just exist in lumber mills. The law of the hog happens whenever power is exercised, whenever you make threats, when you raise your voice, deal with others in a violent, pushing way, then something happens in their brain where they tell a story about the supervisor saying they don't deserve to be treated like this from their supervisor, and it's time for payback. We found the #1 form the hog takes is lack of discretionary effort. People quit going the extra mile. They quit putting energy into their job. They do the bare minimum required to keep from being fired and no more. What an incredible loss of productivity. A nationwide study of workers in America by Daniel Yankelevich, 44% of workers in America report doing the bare minimum to keep from being fired and no more. Hog's a big reason for that. Abuse of power is a big reason for that. We also found the second most common form the hog takes is excessive absenteeism, tardiness, abuse of sick leave. The third, excessive negativity. They badmouth, backbite, gossip, character assassinate, and you start creating a lot of negativity in the workplace where it's them against me. So we found there's prices of trying to hold people accountable just using your power as an organizational leader. Now, with all those things in mind, how do you have that accountability conversation? How do you confront someone when they're not doing what they should, or they don't keep a commitment, or their behavior's out of bounds? Well, the first thing is get your heart right. Don't open your mouth until you get your heart right. I promise, if what you're feeling is anger and frustration with their poor performance and you open your mouth in that condition, what's going to come out is not going to help create accountability. It'll undermine relationships or give people permission to not keep their accountabilities as you go silent and icy cold. So get your heart right first. How do you do that? There's a simple mental skill that when you apply it to your thinking, it actually changes your heart. The skill is you pose a question to your brain. You say, what do I really want in this crucial confrontation? Do I want to shame them? Do I want to scare them? Do I want to intimidate them? Do I want to embarrass them? What do I really want? The follow-up question is, what result am I after? What problem am I trying to solve? And what relationship do I want with this person when the conversation's over? Often, we think about the result, how they've let us down. We approach them upset, trying to bite our tongue, and they sense the anger, they sense the frustration. It feels to them like judgment, like you're assuming automatically they're guilty, and you do damage to the relationship. But when you think through, what do I really want here? What I really want is to solve the problem so we don't have to face it anymore. What I really want is for them to do the job they're supposed to do and keep their commitments. That's the result I'm really after. And when you add this second question, it changes everything. What relationship do I want when this crucial confrontation is over? Well, I want a good working relationship where we're efficient, effective, we can get together, solve problems, get them done, and I can count on them keeping their commitments. That's the kind of relationship I want. As soon as that becomes a goal, it rules out a whole lot of behaviors you'd otherwise be tempted to engage in, like yelling, screaming, threatening, or giving them the silent treatment. By focusing on what you really want, then you get your motives right. You realize I'm trying to solve problems and I'm trying to improve relationships. And with that motive in mind, you behave very differently in a crucial confrontation than you otherwise would have. The second thing you got to do after getting your heart right is you got to get your head right. It is so easy when you get information that someone hasn't performed the way they said they would, it's so easy to judge them as being bad and wrong. Think of them as being lazy or stupid or both. And boy, that creates very strong emotions. The stories we tell ourselves about others, the assumptions we make, the judgments we make, directly affect our emotions, and our emotions tend to drive us to violence or silence. How to get your head right? Again, it's this question I ask myself. She said she would deliver a report filled out and complete on Monday morning at 10 o'clock. It's now noon and there's no report. Okay? She obviously doesn't care about my goals and objectives. She obviously has no integrity. She is just lazy. Boy, as we start making these judgments, it creates very strong frustration and anger. And when she walks in, this is not going to go well. But if you pause a minute and say, wait a minute. She said she'd have it by 10. It's now 12. I don't have it. Why would a reasonable, rational, decent person be 2 hours late? Well, maybe she had problems getting some of the information. Maybe she's having problems contacting me. Maybe she's having problems with her computer and the email. Maybe her stars are out of alignment. She got cut off in traffic, and she got up on the wrong side of the bed. Now, I just identified 5 possible explanations to explain why this isn't happening. Here's the million-dollar question. Which is true? Is it because she's lazy and she doesn't care, or did something come up that prevented it? The truthful answer, I don't know. So why am I jumping to conclusions? Why am I assuming the worst? This question, why would a decent person do that, helps me to see some alternative explanations for the problem other than just she's lazy and doesn't care. When my story that she's lazy and doesn't care changes to a question mark, I'm not judging her, I'm wondering why. The emotion I feel is curiosity or concern rather than anger and frustration. Literally, our stories create our emotions. By changing our story to a question mark, we change our emotions. And now, with my head right, I'm not assuming the worst, my heart right, I want to solve problems and build relationships, you're ready to open your mouth in a crucial confrontation. Now, the skill you use in a crucial confrontation begins with how much safety do I have? If safety is the question, you use a skill called share your good intentions. You say, hey, I appreciate you meeting with me. I really want to make sure we hit the goals that our team has set. I really want to make sure that you're successful in reaching your goals. And I really want you to succeed in your career. I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm not here to make other people happy. I'm here for those reasons. Now, what I did is I just shared my good intention with them. To the degree that they have a history of me speaking truthfully, they say, oh, that's why you're here. And that shows we have mutual purpose, and it's very respectful. It creates safety. To be even more simple, hey, I want to talk to you about I want to talk to you about reaching the goal and making sure we're getting things done right. I want to make sure you've got the help you need and you're as successful as you can be. Okay, there you go. That's stating your intention. How do you know what your intention is? Because a few minutes before beginning this conversation, you ask yourself, what do you really want? And what you want is solve the problem, get the result, and build a strong relationship. Sharing your good intention becomes a way of being upfront and clear about your motives. And if they're good, that creates safety. If they're not good, then communication and dialogue is not going to work for you anyway. And when you're getting into the crucial confrontation, don't make accusations. You liar. We found from our experience that creates defensiveness. Don't start with an I statement of emotion. I am so disappointed at you. Don't start with conclusions or judgments. Don't play games. Don't lay traps or use leading questions like a lawyer. Don't use hot words. What's a hot word? That's an emotionally laden word that assumes guilt. I want to talk to you about your embezzlement. Did anyone notice any hot words in that statement? Hot words trigger hot emotions. Don't use hot words. Okay, here's my question. Have any of you began an accountability conversation using one of those beginnings? Took away all your tools, didn't I? So what do? A really, really simple skill that anyone can use, but very few do. It's called describe the gap. You factually describe what's happened, and in doing so, no conclusions, no judgments, no absolutes, factually describe what happened, and you compare it with what was expected. So picture this line. This black line is expected performance. This is what they committed to do. This is what they said they'd do. This is what the job requires them to do. This is the expected performance, and that's why you can't have accountability until you have clear expectations. This line represents what's expected. You're clear about it, they're clear about it. The red dotted line is the actual performance. And for most of us, most of the time, we're a little above, a little below expectations, and we're going in the right direction, and that's fine. But here's two important things to keep in mind. Number one, never let a significant gap above the line occur. Never let someone significantly exceed expectations. Never let someone go the extra mile without contacting them, pointing out what they did, and praising them for it. Let me throw in a thank you, too. Hey, Sarah, I understand on Friday, after you finished up your work, you pitched in and helped Jim and Sally, and they were able to finish things on time and didn't have to do overtime because of your efforts. That is spectacular. Thank you for doing that for them, for going the extra mile. You helped the whole team reach its goals. I really appreciate it. Never let a significant gap above the expectations occur without thanking the person and pointing it out specifically. Similarly, never let a significant gap below the line occur without confronting that gap. The gap is the difference between what was expected and what happened, between what they committed to and what they delivered, or between what's reasonable behavior boundaries and the way they're acting. Now, how do you describe the gap? Well, you simply factually describe what happened, compare it to what was expected, and ask why. Jim, I noticed today you came in at 8:20. The job requires you to be here at 8. What happened? There you go. That's the skill. Could you do that skill? Could you factually describe what happened, compare it to what's expected, and ask why? No labeling, no accusations. You just simply state the facts and then ask them to help you understand why that gap exists. We found this is the easiest way to begin a crucial confrontation and minimize defensiveness, minimize responses of silence or violence. Just describe the gap and ask why. Now, let me pause here for a minute. What we're saying is when you're going to confront someone about their accountability, it could be you're going to have an accountability conversation with them and praise them for getting the job done and doing well, or they haven't. They've fallen short. Make sure it's safe. Share your good intentions. Describe the gap. Compare what you expected with what you observed, and end with a question. Why? Now, the way I do this most frequently is I just begin by describing the gap. Hey, Sally. If necessary, to make it safe. Now, if you have a relatively good relationship with a lot of safety, then you might not even need to share your good intention. That's only when you think safety's at risk. So most of the time, with most accountability conversations, I describe the gap, end with a question, ask why. To do that well, you got to have your head right, you got to have your heart right, so that you're thinking clearly about this and you're not coming in with accusations. Could you do that? Pretty simple beginning, helps you avoid 60% of the problems that come up in crucial confrontations. All right, now you've described the gap, what do you do? Well, Spock knew. In an episode of Star Trek, Jim said, Mr. Spock, why isn't the Klingon warship responding? Spock said, I've analyzed it carefully, Jim. They are either unable to respond or they don't want to. I love that. This useful information is not just for geeks. Mr. Spock's endorsement, together with 100 years of careful scholarship, teach the same thing. If others don't perform as expected, it's because they don't want to or they're unable to. Maybe both. The reason this is so important is most times when someone doesn't do what they said they'd do, we automatically assume it's a motivation problem. They're lazy, they don't care. And the way you motivate, threaten someone, get angry with them, motivate them, right? Well, that could be the problem, even though that's a lousy solution. It could be motivation, but it could also be ability. They're really motivated, but they were unable to. I'll tell you, one of the most punishing, disrespectful things you can do is try and motivate someone who is already motivated, who's given it their heart, but something's preventing them from doing it. That just creates frustration. Now, so here we go. You describe the gap. Hey, I noticed you came in today at 8:20. Job requires you to be here at 8. What's up? The guy says, you know, I always put in a solid 8 hours. If I come a little late, I stay a little late. Sounds like they don't think it's important to be here on time. Sounds like a motivation problem to me. How do you motivate people? A very simple tool set called Explore Consequences. People are motivated by the consequences they believe will come based on their behavior. People are motivated by consequences. We're thinking beings. We can anticipate. We can draw on our history. So the way you motivate is consequences. Natural consequences are the good and bad things that occur as a natural result of people's current actions. They require no authority or power. When you don't come in at 8 o'clock, people think we're open for business, and customers start calling at 8. If you're not there to answer their call, they could get frustrated and go somewhere else. That's not good customer service, and we could lose customers. See, now that's a natural result, something that's going to happen because of what they did, regardless of your supervision. You could add another. When you're not here to cover your calls, then your associates have to cover their calls and yours, and that's not really fair to them. Consequences motivate people. They begin to see that their actions have consequences, and to the degree those consequences are negative, then they tend to not want to create those consequences. Of course, you could also have positive consequences. What happens when people do keep their commitments and do perform as expected? The second category of consequences are imposed consequences. These are steps that your boss or others will purposefully take to punish or reward others for their behavior. That's such as me putting someone into discipline, the steps of discipline. That's an imposed consequence. It's not natural. It's me deciding to use my authority to make this happen. Something we learned is sometimes the only thing that will motivate someone in an important situation is imposed consequences. But it's always a last resort. If you can motivate someone with natural consequences, you've created an ongoing motivation that doesn't require your presence to get the performance. However, when you impose consequences, then it's short-term, and you'll almost always damage the relationship in doing so. Now, sometimes you have to resort to that, but if you can motivate with natural, then it's a much more effective motivation. Explore natural consequences. Identify outcomes to stakeholders, deadlines, targets. How will this affect your coworkers? How will this affect the customers? Also, make invisible visible. They might think that short-term this makes sense, but it's going to create long-term pain for stakeholders or themselves. And it might be that they don't realize when they don't do something that affects other people in their team, other people in the process, and they haven't been thinking about how it affects others. So these become ways of exploring natural consequences. You make it motivating with consequences. Now, once you've motivated them, they understand, they've complied, they said, okay, I'll do it, then you agree on a plan, and now you have accountability going forward. Now, it might be that it's not a motivation problem, it's an ability problem. Even motivated people can't perform if they're unable. So the way you deal with ability problems is you make it easy. What you do is you explore with them and remove ability barriers. Rather than trying to motivate someone to keep hitting their head against the wall, why don't we just tear down the wall, you know? To deal with ability problems, you ask for their ideas and brainstorm. They said, I'm really sorry, my alarm didn't go off. I was late because my alarm didn't go off. Well, that sounds like they wanted to be here on time, but something prevented them. Well, do you have any ideas of what you could do to make sure you're on time tomorrow? Well, I guess I could buy a new alarm clock. That sounds good. And now you've overcome the ability problem, and they made an agreement to be here on time tomorrow. Useful scripts to help brainstorm or get their best thinking is, what do you think it'll take to get this done next time? Or how do you think we could solve this problem? And they come up with ideas. If you don't like them, say, no, I don't think that'll work. If they come up with one you like, you say, yes, let's do that. If they can't come up with one that you think will solve the problem, then you suggest some. After identifying how to remove the ability problem, you agree on a plan. The final step in the accountability conversation, the final step in a crucial confrontation, is decide who does what by when. Very specifically, who will be doing what, by when. And then follow up. What happens if you go through all this work and don't follow up? You just told them, I was just kidding. It isn't all that important. Now, could you use consequences to motivate a boss? Yeah. Said, you know, when we met, you said you'd be providing this resource to our team, an extra person, and that we'd have them by May. It's now the end of May, and we still don't have an extra person, which I was counting on to meet our deadline in August. What happened? Describe the gap, ask why. They said, you know, we thought about it, and we're kind of shorthanded, and I just decided not to provide you someone. Sounds like a motivation problem. Say, well, I will certainly go with your decision and support your decision. And I want you to understand that there's some consequences that will come because of that. Can I just explain to you a little bit of how that's going to affect our team and how that could affect the deadline, and then I'll do whatever you decide to do. And so the same principles can be used up the chain, down the chain, or with peers. But remember to be respectful. Remember to work on mutual purpose. I just told the boss I'll do whatever she says. I'm on her team, and I want to get that deadline. And respectfully, I said there might be some things you're not aware of, that the invisible I want to make visible. And now we're using these skills up the chain of command to motivate. Well, remember, if you avoid holding others accountable, you lower the standard and you're part of the problem. If you intimidate when you hold others accountable, you exacerbate conflict, you undermine the relationship, and you're part of the problem. Get better at resolving conflict, and you'll dramatically improve both results and relationships. Resolve to hold people accountable. Resolve to point out the great work they're doing and praise them for it, and problem solve when there's a gap. We have found that as this becomes part of a culture, it dramatically impacts every outcome a leader cares about. Works at home too. Hey, wish you the best with your accountability discussions, and encourage you to use the tool Crucial Confrontations. Turn it back to Paul.
Thanks, Ron. Your story about the hostage negotiator, I've heard it many times and it still never gets old. I also love your example of hot words such as embezzlement. That never gets old either. We're at the top of the hour. We don't have a lot of time for questions, so what I would suggest is in your confirmation email that you received today, there's my email address, pyocum@vitalsmarts.com. Should you have any questions on the topic, go ahead and submit them to me, and I'll work with Ron, and we'll see if we can get some of those answered for you. I do just want to share one last thing. Just for attending today, we promised that we would send out a copy of our Silence Fails research study, and we will do that in a post-event email along with the recording that we promised to send. Last year, we also did a pretty unique study here at Vital Smarts where we tied, we looked at the cost of avoiding conflict. So there's when you avoid conflict in your organization, there's actually a direct correlation to increased costs by avoiding those confrontations. So with that, we're at the top of the hour and at the end of our session. Again, we want to thank Ron for his presentation today. We'd like to thank you for joining us. And again, if you have any questions, go ahead and email those to us, and we'll try to get back to you and get those answered. Be on the lookout for a post-event email with links to all these resources that we promised as well. And with that, we will sign off and wish you a great rest of the day. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye now.